In this video, I am sewing the bearer area in a different method than I did in the original videos for an overall cleaner and stronger finish. You may need a firm understanding of how I make trousers before this video may become useful, otherwise it'll be quite disjointed. You could pick only a few of these methods and apply them to your own trousers should you wish. You don't need to apply them all in the same trouser. And you can find my accompanying trouser series in the description. And this seems very simple to me. I'm genuinely not sure why I've taken such a long video. This method is a bit easier to do to begin with than the original method, because all we have to do is not apply salicia to the bearer. We should cut out the bearer's salicia, but we don't machine it to the bearer. It is important in this method to create the large blocky bearer that I have a sort of handout for you that you might like to take a copy or screenshot, for which I also have a template. Importantly, making the bottoms 4.5 centimeters and 5.5 centimeters from the notch. Drawing on the line for the fly on top, as stated in my original video, I always cut the trouser consistently so I can lay the top side chalk up to the cut and cut the flying bearer out chalking on the fly so I can cut it out of the bearer that I draw. Right? When we cut out the bearer's salicia, copy the curve with the notch onto the cloth as well. Beyond the bottom edge, give yourself 15 centimeters or so of salicia beyond it. Cutting it out, give yourself a few centimeters of seam allowance beyond the gently curved edge with the notch. At the gentle curve of the bearer, we'll snip into the cloth towards the line we chalked, but definitely not crossing it. We just want to make it easier to fold over. Press the salicia over on the fly curve. Cutting the salicia for the fly as well, I want it to be at least 4 centimeters wide and have at least 6 centimeters beyond the bottom of the fly. We apply the linen, and to the fly I apply the salicia in the normal way. I save the bearer salicia for later. I want to sew the zip and bearer to the trouser in a slightly different manner. This is only really doable if we have overlocked the cloth though. I am cutting the notch back into the fly so that it's clear despite the overlocking. Usually I like to pin the appropriate pieces to the appropriate top sides so that I can just take them to the machine and position them there. Starting with the zip, placing it to the seam with the bottom stop a normal distance above the notch. I want to line the zip tape up to the edge of the overlocking, being 4 or 5 millimeters from the edge of the cloth, using the overlocking as a guide. Backtack the zip at the notch on the edge of the tape, machining still on the edge of the tape, keeping the zip very even on the overlocking. We can sew it all the way off of the top of the trouser. With the bearer, lining up the notches and placing it right side of the front. Essentially, we need to machine from the notch as close as we can get to the zip teeth between the cloth. So I move the needle to level with the notch and move the machine foot to the edge of the bottom stop. I can feel through the cloth that I can't get my nail between the foot and the zip teeth. This is what we're looking for all the way up. Machining the zip and the bearer this way gives us a much better seam allowance on the fly and makes it easier to press open. We are preparing and pressing the fly quite normally. Well, for this video I'm doing it slightly differently to original, but that's for another video. On the bearer at the notch, I want to cut to the base of the stitching. We can cut through everything, but usually I would prefer to just cut the front trouser and the bearer. I'm pressing the bearer's seam towards the bearer while the zip remains flat, pointing into the trouser. Sometime after we put the waistband on, possibly as we're lining the trouser, is when we need to apply the salicia, at least after we get the curtains on, as usual passing the seam between the trouser and the bearer. With the trouser possibly on a sleeve board, linen side up, draw on the shape of the bearer. I'm feeling through the fly to copy the shape, specifically to follow the shape and size of the fly at the bottom. I also have a template for the bearer that I can copy. I need to cut away the section of the bandroll canvas that passes the shape that I chalked out. Coincidentally, the bandroll here already sits behind the shape that I want. To copy the salicia, we will place it onto the right side of the bearer. I pin it down. You can see the seam allowance and inlay of the bearer goes into the trouser. It works about the same way if it's up in the waistband. We just cut it down to below the top of the waistband. We will machine along the line that we chalked. We ought to back tack at the stitching a millimeter or so below the top of the waistband. Follow the chalk mark from the template or what you just drew. At the bottom of the bearer, back tack. I want to back tack just a little above the raw edge so that I can cover it with the fly's salicia. I'm cutting away the excess cloth beyond the stitching, leaving myself about a 1 cm seam allowance. Bagging out the bearer, now ironing it as I go. We could put a baste in it along the edge as well. The bearer is already folded along the line that we want it to be at this point, so we can just put the curtain and lining in at this stage, if not already. There's not a real hard and fast rule to a lot of the orders we do things in, but maybe you'll find something that you particularly like. When we have the linings and curtains basted or stuck on somehow, baste the bearer's salicia to the seam allowance between the notch and the waistband, all the time ensuring that the seam allowance of the bearer is pressed open. We can do a line of machining to substitute 2 hand finishing stitches. Starting at the waistband seam, I want to either sew in the seam between the trouser and the zip, or just on the trouser, or a foot's width from the zip teeth. At least 2 of those coinciding. Back tack at the waistband, keeping an even stitch down to as close as the notch as we can get, back tacking again at the bottom. On the inside of the trouser, I want to take the excess salicia from the bottom of the fly and fold it over the raw edges of the fly and the bearer. Hold the bottoms of the fly and bearer together, moving the bearer's salicia out of the way. Fold the excess of the tape on the fly up so that it sits across the raw edges of both pieces. Holding it there, fold the salicia along the raw edge of the fly and bearer that we just covered with said salicia, so that it's essentially wrapped in salicia. I do just the same thing a second time here just to try and make it clear. It might be easier to do this sat at your machine so that you can immediately stick it into the machine. Hence, as you would expect, I want to machine on the salicia to join and cover the albeit hidden bottoms of the 2 pieces. I do a second small stitch just at the edge between the two pieces to join them all the way to the edges. Penultimately, after the majority of the bearer's salicia is fixed in place, is on the reverse of the salicia facing's seam, is find where it is level with the notch. Make a snip into the salicia that remains about 5 mm from the fold. This way we can fold the raw edges of the fly and bearer underneath the salicia and completely hide them. From here we can do a tack or some prick stitches to keep the layers together, sewing it all to the seat's seam allowance. From here we have the excess salicia coming out from the bottom of the bearer. I want to lay this out flat and iron it into a more narrow point, so ideally around 2 cm wide at point. When the edges are pressed, I usually need to trim either side of the salicia so that the raw edges aren't sticking out from either side. I trim them with my pinking shears just because I want this area to be as neat as possible. We will use this to cover the fork seam. We need to have enough that the salicia won't pull on the fork. Hold the trouser up, pick a point of the salicia and hold it to the end of the inseam inlay. Hold it tightly there and pull the fork every which way. If the salicia is pulling on the fork, then give it some more. If it's fine, then lessen the amount of salicia just so that there isn't too much. When you find where it's not too tight but there's not a load extra, fold the salicia along where it's level with the inseam inlay. We can press it over so that it's a clean edge and cut away some of the excess. Finishing will largely otherwise be the same as usual. The only slight difference is that we do not have to fill the salicia to the front edge of the waistband on the bearer. It is neater and more secure because it's already machined down there. You can close it since there's a hole to the inside, but I just don't think it's necessary. Another thing we can do while prick stitching the edge of the bearer, we can prick stitch the bearer and fly together. We can baste the salicia onto the fork after we cross stitch the seam allowances down, but I usually just hold it down, lining up the foremost edge to the end of the inlay where we can fill the folded edges and prick stitch across the one edge to finish it, filling down the other edge. Remember the bar tack level with the bottom stop of the zip of the bearer and the bearer buttonhole.